Why do we lack the know-how to solve the problems of this world? Why can't man get along with fellow man? Why is there so much hatred and strife, violence and bloodshed between human beings? What is the cause, and where is it leading? God reveals the answers to these questions in the one book most people ignore, the Holy Bible.
The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. In looking at the way world events are unfolding, a discerning observer would know that an explosion is coming. It's only a matter of time. Just look at the widespread and senseless acts of evil in our world, and modern technology is only helping to spread the violence and immorality that much faster. Here in the United States, in recent months, we've seen the flash mob phenomenon take a violent turn for the worse. It used to be young people would text and tweet and post messages on Facebook to encourage masses of people to assemble together in public for seemingly harmless fun like dancing. But now some of these flash mobs are morphing into violent gangs where young people coordinate assaults and robberies with the help of social media. Last year in downtown Philadelphia, a group of violent youth started fighting with each other, assaulting pedestrians and vandalizing the shopping district. This year, in February, about 50 young people in St. Paul, Minnesota, assaulted a convenience store worker and then looted the store before law enforcement officials even knew what happened. In April, another gang of about 20 people descended on a clothing store in Washington, D.C., and quickly grabbed about $20,000 worth of merchandise before fleeing the scene in every direction. In all of these cases, authorities believe the mob robbing was organized through cell phone texting. In New York, another group of teenagers used social media devices in May to coordinate an attack on a restaurant. The teens simply showed up at the restaurant in broad daylight and ransacked the place. They kicked over tables, flung chairs at employees, and destroyed equipment. Then they grabbed some food and drink and took off. They left almost as fast as they arrived. Then there's Chicago. Have you noticed what's been happening in Chicago lately? Over Memorial Day weekend, 6 people were gunned down and another 21 were wounded in shootings. There have been several other incidents of flash mob violence in recent weeks. It's gotten so bad that tourists have been told to avoid the Magnificent Mile, the upscale shopping and dining district. Earlier this year, in April, 2 Illinois lawmakers called on the National Guard to protect the streets of Chicago. The National Guard. This is Chicago, remember, not Gaza or Fallujah. This is America's heartland. The mayor of Chicago has since added 150 policemen to the streets of the city just to help curb these senseless acts of violence and murder. And that in itself reveals how bad it is. Most major cities in the U.S. right now are scaling back law enforcement resources because they're broke. They have no money. Chicago's up to its eyeballs in debt. But the streets are now so dangerous that they have no choice but to flood the city with more policemen. Is this normal? When will this current of hateful violence subside? Or will it get worse? Look at the news. It seems like every week there's another shooting or a brawl at a fast food chain. And when have we ever witnessed this much indifference and apathy from bystanders who watch violent behavior firsthand and do nothing about it? Some of you may have seen a video of 2 girls who attacked a young woman at a McDonald's in Baltimore back in April. The victim was beaten so badly that she had a seizure after the assault. Throughout the sustained and brutal assault, in front of many witnesses, the victim's only defender was a little old lady who tried to fend off the criminals. And the men? They couldn't be bothered. They were too busy laughing and cheering. One of them even filmed the incident so that he could later post it online. Not one man stepped forward to protect that woman. A few weeks ago, Robert Morley wrote a powerful piece we posted at thetrumpet.com about an incident in San Francisco where a man suffering from suicidal depression decided to drown himself in the bay. Onlookers actually witnessed the incident, which went on for nearly an hour as the man waded out into the bay and waited to be swallowed by the rising tide. No one tried to save the man. Only one bystander called the police. Even after rescuers arrived, no one helped. There were firemen there, policemen, dozens of spectators, and a man in the water flailing about, face down. Mr. Morley writes, when firefighters arrived, they refused to act even later as the man began to drown. They made the excuse, by the way, that they hadn't been properly trained. He says, the Coast Guard did nothing because the water was too shallow for its boat. Reporters did nothing because they were too busy getting the story. Hikers, dog walkers, cyclists turned spectators did nothing. The police did nothing because it wasn't their jurisdiction. Other bystanders did nothing because the police wouldn't let them. Mr. Morley says Zach's horrified, wheelchair-bound stepmother was understandably outraged that she was forced to watch her son die while rescue officials stood idly by. It's hard to imagine something like that happening just 15 or 20 years ago, let alone at America's founding. In fact, as Mr. Morley writes, there are times when you find better examples of life-saving sacrifice in the animal kingdom than you do in the human kingdom. He referred to a YouTube video where a herd of water buffalo was chased by several lions, and in that dramatic scene, one little calf ended up being chased into the water's edge where lions swarmed in for the kill. And then, to make matters worse for the little buffalo, a crocodile emerged from the water and grabbed hold of the calf. The lions eventually won the tug-of-war with the crocodile and prepared for a feast on the shore. And that's right when the video takes a sudden and unexpected turn. The herd of buffalo responded to the cries of distress coming from the calf and rallied to its defense. The buffalo actually managed to drive away the lions one by one and save the life of that little calf. Think about that. The natural impulse of those buffalo was to intervene on behalf of the dying calf. Now, one would think that if a young woman was being assaulted and beaten at a public facility, that a young man's natural impulse would be to step forward and help. But more often than not, that isn't what happens. What a sad commentary on our society today, and what a revealing sign of the times in which we live. Let's turn to the Bible and see what God has to say. Notice Luke chapter 10 to begin with. This is in Luke 10 and verse 25. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Notice now how Jesus responded to this question. Verse 26, he said unto him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? What do you read in the law? You're a lawyer. You know the law. What does the Bible say? Verse 27, and he answering said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said unto him, You have answered right. This do, and you shall live. The lawyer answered correctly. He had the right answer. But as Jesus brings out, you've got to go beyond that and actually act on that right knowledge and actually act on that truth. Verse 29, But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? In this scholar's mind, he loved his neighbor the way he saw it. He loved his best friends. That's what he considered his neighbor to be. His buddies, his friends. Jesus goes on to explain, though, verse 30, and Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. So here he slips into this parable now to reinforce the lesson that he wanted to teach this lawyer. And he says there's this man, this traveler, who goes to Jerusalem. He probably sold some goods, made the money or pocketed the money, and then headed back to Jericho, about 20-mile journey. And then along the way, he's attacked by these bandits who rob him, who beat him, who leave him. He's left for dead, basically. Verse 31, and by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, the victim that is, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. Now these were religious teachers. They undoubtedly were very familiar with the two great commands quoted in verse 27 of this chapter. They knew about these two great commands, but they, like that lawyer, probably reasoned in their minds, well, who is my neighbor? I mean, after all, this is a Samaritan. This is a Gentile. This isn't one of my fellow Jews. This isn't one of my neighbors. This is someone else. This is someone outside that circle. This is the way they must have thought. This is the way they must have reasoned around God's law. Because as you can see from the parable, they went to the other side of the street and quickly passed by. They quickly moved on. They just didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to be bothered with this problem. They didn't want to help their fellow man. Verse 33, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow when he departed, he took up 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever you spend more, when I come again, I will repay you. I mean, in the case of this Samaritan, his natural impulse, his spontaneous reaction was to help the victim, no matter who it was. He had compassion on this victim. He took him in. He nurtured him. He nursed him back to health. He left money with the innkeeper to then take care of the situation thereafter, and then promised to return and reimburse him for any additional cost. What an attitude. What an example of how we ought to treat our fellow man, of how we ought to treat human beings. This is the lesson that Jesus wanted us to learn, to go above and beyond for others, to love our neighbor. That's the way of a Christian. Verse 36, which now of these 3, think you, was the neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, he that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, go and do likewise. There's a lesson here. Jesus was teaching that a true Christian must be compassionate and impartial in rendering assistance to others. A compassionate and impartial being who is helpful. This is from the Daily Mirror, a recent story back in April, about one who did step forward and help to try to settle a dispute and notice the outcome of it. It's about a father. He's a father of 4 over in London. And he walked into McDonald's one day to get a hot chocolate. He sees 2 people fighting, and he goes to break up the fight. And the Mirror writes that one of the 2 patrons that he was trying to break up then shouted at this man. And according to the Mirror, says, you're going to die tonight. You're not going to see the morning. The newspaper goes, the thug is then said to have phoned an accomplice to fetch a gun, yelling into his mobile, bring me that thing. And then the victim, it says, left the 24-hour McDonald's but was chased into a cul-de-sac. The gun was then delivered, and the victim was beaten and pistol-whipped before being shot 3 times in an alley in Brixton, South London. What a world we live in. I mean, here's a case where one actually did step forward, a good Samaritan, if you will, to try to stop a fight, to try to stop 2 people from killing themselves. And this is how they repaid him.